You're watching Let the Quran Speak. The Quran describes many prophets and heroes that are known from other sources, but it puts a new twist on their stories. These individuals include Moses, Joshua, David, Saul, and Jesus. The Quran portrays these individuals as models of peace, even though they are known from other sources to exhibit violence. Why does the Quran do that? We turn to that question now with Brother Shabir Ali. Brother Shabir, we know that the Quran draws upon sources that were known at the time, and yet it comes up with a different formulation. Why is that so?
Yes, of course, I want to add a comment here that the classical Muslim view on the Quran is that it's a revelation from God to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, nothing to do with earthly sources. Mm-hmm. But non-Muslim students of the Quran have long identified that the Quran corresponds to many classical and pre-Islamic sources.
Mm-hmm. And some people have even said that the Quran copies from other sources.
Yes. And in that line of study, it is also recognized that the Quran not only or not just simply borrows the material from other sources, but refashions the material to bring out Islam's particular theology. So, for example, you will not find that a certain prophet, let's say Noah, for example, he doesn't have any preaching in the Bible, mm-hmm. But in the Quran, he is a preacher of monotheism. So the Quran takes according to these students of the Quran takes the stories from the previous sources and then refashions the image of the heroes and prophets involved and makes them preach Islamic theology.
Mm-hmm. So what sort of work has been done on this? What scholars are involved with that sort of work?
Many non-Muslim Orientalist scholars. Mm-hmm. Now, the topic at hand is a topic that has been scarcely studied. I'm not aware that anyone has looked at what about the violent image that is associated with some of the prophets of old, mm-hmm. and how that image is refashioned in the Quran to make this now a peaceful image. And I believe that this is important because when, in modern context, we ask if the Quran is a peaceful book or a violent book, we need to know the big picture. I mean, before we look at specific verses of the Quran, what is the ethos that guides the Quran as a whole? Is the Quran meant to be a peaceful book or a violent book? And we can see that the Quran, in presenting the images of the prophets and heroes who are to be our models, presents them as peaceful individuals, even though, as you rightly said, they are known from other sources to have some violence associated with them.
Mm-hmm. So let's look at some of these prophets. I'll throw out a name, Moses, for you.
No such violence as is known about Moses from other sources is found in the Quran. And I'll give you a specific case in point. The destruction of the Moabites. It is mentioned that Moses and his people were passing by the Moabites, and Moses said that it is by the command of the Lord that you are to kill the Moabites. And so his men kill off the Moabites, but they spared the Moabite women. And then Moses was not happy with that until they killed off the Moabite women as well, because it is said that these are the very women who have been instrumental in misleading the Israelites. Now, at the end of it, the spoils taken from the conquered peoples here were counted up, and among the spoils were 32,000 young girls. Mm-hmm. So everyone else was killed, the boys, the women, the men, but just the young girls were spared. So if 32,000 were spared, you get an idea of how many were killed, because mm-hmm. For every girl that was spared, probably she had a mother killed, father killed, maybe brothers and other sisters who were older than her. Mm-hmm. So this story is not mentioned in the Quran.
Mm-hmm. It's just deleted altogether.
Yes, and so we have Moses in the Quran presented as a prophet, a messenger of God, preaching to people, pleading with them to accept that there is no God but God, to stay away from idol worship, and so on.
Mm-hmm. What about Joshua?
Joshua is not mentioned by name in the Quran. In the 18th chapter of the Quran, Moses goes out in search of knowledge, and he has with him a young aide. And in the commentaries on the Quran, that young aide is identified as Joshua. Now, so nothing is mentioned in the Quran of Joshua associated with violence. If anything, he's there with Moses in search of knowledge. But it's known from other sources that Joshua led armies to attack town after town, or city after city, Jericho, for example, and that he and his men wiped out the entire cities, one after another. So the Quran obviously has the opportunity here to take this figure who is known from other histories as a violent figure. If the Quran wanted to be a violent book, the Quran could have said, look, here is a hero, this is what he did, do like this hero. But on the other hand, the Quran here with the Joshua story in Surah Al-Kahf, the 18th chapter, is emphasizing the search for knowledge and the search for things spiritual.
All right, let's move on to David. We know him as the individual who killed Goliath.
Yes, and in the Quran too, it is mentioned that David killed Goliath. But not in the way in which the story is detailed elsewhere.
Okay.
For example, elsewhere it is noted that he cut off the head of Goliath, and in the Quran it's just a simple statement, he killed Goliath. In the Quran, David is presented as a king and also as a prophet, and it is mentioned in the Quran that what kings do is that they despoil lands. But it is not mentioned specifically about David much more than this. It is said, for example, that God made it possible for him to devise coats of armor for body protection, which obviously would be in a war situation. But much more than this is known about David in history that is associated with some very crude violence. For example, it is mentioned that David wanted to marry a girl. And the girl's father said, well, okay, you want to marry my daughter? The bride price will be 200 Philistine foreskins. And that means basically that David has to go out and kill 200 Philistines and then bring their foreskins back. And he did that to marry the girl. But none of this is mentioned in the Quran.
Do you think it's because the Quran was simply summarizing stories? Because it seems like the Quran doesn't include as many details as in the past that we've known about these prophets.
Yeah, this is naturally one part of it, that the Quran does not mention all of the details of the previous prophets, but the details that the Quran does mention is not only by way of summary, it's sometimes by expansion, but the Quran is expanding on those aspects of the prophet's stories which the Quran wants to present to its Muslim readers as model behavior.
So can you give an example of an expansion then?
In the story of Noah, we know that the flood came and wiped out Noah's people. But what the Quran does is present Noah as a preacher of monotheism and one who is continually pleading with his people. And though this is not mentioned in the Bible, it is now mentioned in the Quran that Noah is this preacher of monotheism, and he pleads with his people again and again. He tries many different methods. He speaks to them openly. He approaches them privately. He announces publicly. He talks to them quietly, and so on. He uses every possible method to plead with his people. This is the model behavior that the Quran wants to bring out in the story of Noah. So here, it's not a summary of what was mentioned before, but rather an expansion.
Are there any other prophets that have struck you as being portrayed in a peaceful way in the Quran?
Yes, there are others. In your introduction, you mentioned Jesus, and we didn't come to him.
You mentioned Saul.
And you mentioned Saul. Well, let me start with Saul. It is known that Saul was a king, and in the Quran his name is mentioned as Talut in the second chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah. Now, the Quran praises him for his knowledge, his wisdom, and his stature. but doesn't say much about him being involved in violent confrontations. Where the Quran does mention the armies meeting, it's mentioned in a kind of an ordinary way, without showing like the nitty-gritty of violent activity. But elsewhere it is mentioned that Saul was commanded by the prophet Samuel, who in turn was being commanded by God. So the chain of command was being handed down now to Saul, that Saul was to kill all of the Amalekites, and to kill everybody, men, women, children, it even mentioned infants, and the cattle. But Saul killed everybody except the sheep and goats. And then it says that God was sorry that he made Saul king because Saul didn't carry out the command as he should have. He should have killed even the sheep and goats, because there was an idea that you enter a town and you kill everything that breathes. But that is, of course, not mentioned in the Quran at all.
We're running out of time, so we might not get to Jesus, but maybe you can tell us why the Quran has portrayed these individuals in a very peaceful way.
Well, the Quran presents all of these individuals, whether Jesus or Saul or David or Moses or Joshua and Abraham, whom we didn't get to in detail. Because the Quran presents these individuals as models for us. The Quran enjoins on Muslims to follow the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and enjoins on the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to follow his predecessor prophets. And God says, we will guide you to the ways of those who came before you. And God is guiding us by presenting these prophets as good moral examples. They were men who stood for peace. They are men who worked for peace. They are men who preached peace. And they remain now as models for Muslims for all time, because their stories are in the Quran. And Muslims approach their stories not from other sources, but through the Quranic depiction of these great prophets.
Thank you, Brother Shabir. We appreciate those interesting insights or new insights into the prophets.
You're welcome.
That's all the time we have. Visit our website, www.quranspeaks.com, and check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/QuranSpeaks. As always, please continue to write to us. Your comments and questions help guide the show. I'm Safiya Ali. For all of us here at Let the Quran Speak, thank you for watching. I'll see you next week.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allah.